When shown off at the Microsoft Showcase 2 years back, I don't think I could have told you what Scorn would be other than a wet and creepy game with a style I hadn't seen before in a video game ever. After finishing Scorn, I can tell you that I can't tell you all that much about it, and it definitely was not what I was expecting. And after completing it, I'm not even sure if I like it so much as a video game. So here I am again, making another video in a sea of other talking heads discussing Scorn for the sheer desire of my own self-indulgence on sharing my thoughts about this conundrum of a game and is it worth your time at all or not. While normally focusing the channel on games that aren't brand new, I feel this game warrants the discussion based on the fact that this game just hit different. Before getting into the meat of the video, there are going to be some spoilers all throughout this video, so if you're sensitive to that or have any aversion to gore and tons of sexual connotations, go ahead and click off this video and stay tuned for the next one, and thank you for stopping by. That Days Gone video is coming soon, I absolutely promise. But enough preamble, let's go ahead and dive right into the video. Scorn is an odd game in the main, and in many respects isn't a video game at all. Much like the renaissance of walking simulators that came into prominence with Gone Home back in the 2010s, Scorn has a lot of these same vibes. Whereas Gone Home was focused on delivering a narrative, Scorn feels a lot more like it's delivering a series of art showcases. But to reach this conclusion, we need to start at the beginning. We awake as a character. That's basically all the explanation you're given. You wake up. And waking up in this biomechanical dystopia after falling from a cliff, we proceed into a facility that seems to be creating some semblance of people. We can infer this by the fact that we're moving what looks like eggs or cocoons into a loader, only to find what looks like a person down below, albeit sounding pretty childish. In the act of either rescuing the child from the pod or brutally murdering him with the scooper device, we use him or his arm to open a large door and continue forward. No exposition, no lore, no story to be found. This is where I begin to question my enjoyment of Scorn in the very first act. While this game is grotesque and actually pretty beautiful in a way, the world itself is creating a lot of intriguing questions. Why are there bodies everywhere? Why is this human thing that came from the egg? Who are we? Where the hell am I? You know, normal questions one has when starting a video game. Instead of the game feeding us any bits of lore or exposition, we're basically given nothing. Now, this isn't inherently a bad thing. I mean, let's look back to Inside in the video that we released about a month ago, which also doesn't really have any exposition. However, what Inside does is it actually leaves breadcrumbs for the player to kind of pick up and do with it as they will. Scorn basically leaves you nothing. You're put in the world and meant to solve the puzzles and move forward while just trying to piece together from world building and exercise. Now, not having anything to go off of makes this extremely difficult. Hence why a lot of this video, there will be a lot of baseless conclusions that I've made in this video in my time playing the game. You may have other interpretations, and those can be completely valid, as there's no way of confirming nor denying that any of these are actually fact. As I said, this isn't inherently bad, but it's just an odd decision for something that doesn't want to go out of its way to explain anything. However, it doesn't really give the player anything to latch on to in order to create any sort of conclusion. It's honestly a bit of a travesty as a video game perspective and just trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And I do wish that the developers had left kind of something for every player to latch on to. So let's continue on. We move to the next area, being met with a pile of dead bodies, seemingly having been dumped by some sort of rail car system. We see a ton of these in almost every area of the game, with so much death in this world that an entire rail system was constructed for hauling corpses. It is here that we obtain the first weapon in Scorn, or what I refer to as the penis pummeler, for obvious reasons. Not only is it used for whacking creatures in the area, but we use it to activate the biomechanical machines in the area by thrusting it in the hole and give it the old swirl technique. Essentially, we're fucking every button to completion. In the center of the area, we see a giant living pillar, and after injecting it with some goo, explodes, seemingly killing our character as the screen fades to black. I'll be honest, I'm not really sure what this area has to do with all of it, as it's probably the most different space that we've seen and will see in the rest of the game. This area seems alive, including with the little bubble drones that are spraying the pods in the area. Are they tending to the living pillar in the middle, or the pods surrounding it? Are there more of these human-esque creatures in the pods being kept alive by these little dudes? Once again, more questions and no answers. We awaken a separate pod in the middle of the desert, and after ripping out the umbilical cord that is attached, we migrate back to the facility from the barren wastelands, spotting what looks like giant mechanical heads out in the distance. We also notice that everything outside seems to be dissolving into the wind, a sign of the dying civilization as fleshy creep extends down from the ridgeline to the facility, much like the Zerg creep from StarCraft. Is this meant to be there, or is it some sort of foreign corruption to the landscape? The world's way of fighting back this mechanical monstrosity of a building, which, much like moss, can infest a derelict house. Again, just my interpretation, but given what we will be running into later, this is my best judgment. We head into the facility to be met with a flesh-rending centipede-esque creature attaching itself to us, a parasite attempting to control us, while allowing for the player to carry his little pod full of ammo and health, and giving us back the penis pummeler. As we move through the rest of the game, this creature exists only to continuously rip the player in half from the stomach, and being the only thing that takes away from the player agency for any amount of time. This thing that's been attempting to control us, growing itself and changing the character, so much so that eventually the weapon is grafted to the player, and in order to use switches, needs to have its fleshy tendrils ripped off of the arm in order to interact with the world around us. We go about moving giant mechanical ball elevators and gathering more guns to service the combat against the fleshy monsters. These may be some of the coolest firearms I've ever seen in video games, the infusion of flesh and machine being both horrifying and audibly satisfying. As you rip the stock apart from its fleshy receiver to load rounds into the muscle tissue below, only to slap it all back together, is maybe one of the coolest reload animations I have ever seen. While the weapons of Scorn are awesome to interact with, the combat may be the worst I've ever experienced in a video game as well. With the slow movement, it feels like that these enemies are going to take away a chunk of your health no matter what I tried to do. You could kill them, but once out of ammo, you're left with just the penis pummeler, which, taking 5 hits to kill most enemies in this game, meant a lot of running away and taking the 2 swings, then circling around to repeat, waiting for the cooldown to begin. It was so tedious and annoying that if there was any way to run away from these creatures, I took every opportunity possible to do so, just to avoid the combat and conserve ammunition, which there really isn't that much of either. Spawning from the fleshy corruption that is infused with the mechanical structure we are placed in, these enemies are seemingly endless, and with only 3 varieties, get pretty old pretty damn quick. With the first 2 acts of the game thus far having been more focused on puzzles, which made the combat of acts 3 and 4 feel far more confusing and felt more like a side project that was never fully finished. It felt like an aspect of feature creep, straying from the core original puzzle mechanic design just to add something in the slow walks back and forth through the corridors of the space. To me, it just feels pretty bad and honestly shouldn't have even been included in the first place. We enter Act 4 after using the balls to destroy all the fleshy tendrils to be met with what looks like a giant flesh creature in the center of the area. An achievement pops here named At the Lowermost Point, meaning that we have trudged through thick and thin of this facility to get to the lowermost point, and this creature exists at the bottom of the facility. And again, the question is asked, why is he here? He makes no effort to stop you while you explode what I can only refer to as his 3 scrotums to lift some puzzles into the center of his actual body. All he does is stare, which is creepy for sure, but not really threatening at all. Is he the reason for spawning this fleshy corruption? Is he the result of the world fighting back against this mechanical abomination of a building erected here? Again, we have no answers, direction, or inkling as to why this creature is here, and the player is expected to just accept the fact that it is what it is and move on. As we lift the elevator and seemingly take it through the monster's actual head, explaining the fleshy mass that explodes and lands in the elevator, we get to what can only be the closest analogy to a train car and take it to the final citadel, another massive mechanical structure out in the distance. Given the iconography of the space, with its many statues depicting sex and pregnancy, it's hard not to see this palace as a place of high rule where the leadership caste existed. As we have in the rest of the game, we see the creature latched to us from before, ripping our insides out over and over again, becoming more and more frequent in this area, with fleshy tendrils sprouting from the player and arms and legs infected by the creature, as he seems to slowly be taking the player over. Entering the atrium, we see a giant red flesh-ridden door in the background, showing more humanoid creatures with muscle structure in amongst all the bones, with what looks like a hive mind littered with brains in the ceiling above, foreshadowing events that will sure to come to pass. Heading downstairs, there are 2 more humanoid beings with giant red bellies that we need to fill with more red goo to sprout a plant form on their face. We attain this goo by essentially squishing baby-esque things with giant teeth and taking its blood. This to me seems like another allegory in regards to abortion, but again, why? Taking these babies in jars, like something out of of Death Stranding and placing them in these unpowered robots with muscle structure, we have to fight 2 of them in order to destroy the jar babies, these tooth-ridden, nasty, filthy creatures, as they're fighting back to prevent their subsequent squishing. We obtain the grenade launcher, and upon doing so, lose the battle with the creature attached to our backs and are now covered in corruption, grafting the weapon to our hand and unable to use our left hand at all, thus not being able to interact with the world around us. The only way to free ourselves is to rip the tendrils by force, the corruption being so deep that it pains the player to actually do so, actually losing real health as we bleed from the wounds that we just created on our own selves, the self-mutilation. We go to the extraction machine and focus on our back, only to discover that this creature has a human-esque face with blue eyes resembling what the player actually looks like. You can see the fear and horror in its single eye as we take the claw and free ourselves from the creature, which in looking back I did feel a little bad about as I cringed at the sound it made at being ripped from the flesh. We take ourselves up pretty battered and broken after loading all the baby goo and use the machine in the center of the room, removing our brains and tossing it up into the hive mind, adding the player's consciousness and giving control to the 2 pregnant humanoids we just injected with the goo before. The act of possessing made me think back to the end of Act 2, where the player was covered in the white goo and awoke being birthed again. With this idea of shifting consciousness, I couldn't help but think that we had added our own consciousness to the new body being birthed, leaving the old body behind to come back as the creature grafted to our backs. This would explain why the creature had a humanoid face resembling us, so taking by the corruption that it was just trying to survive. Once again, this is pure conjecture, and I wish I could point to something to support this idea, but alas, like the rest of the game, I can't. After opening the red flesh door, we go back to carry our own body through the door to the swirling openness behind it, only to be stopped again by the creature, and in the last scene are turned into whatever this is. The game fades to black, and credits roll. In the completion of Scorn, I was left dumbfounded with far more questions than what I went into the game with. I can appreciate the art of leaving the story up to the conjecture of the player, but in doing that, there needs to be some sort of trail along the way for the player to follow. In Scorn, we get none of that, and what this amounts to is a series of rooms and puzzles that don't say much of anything. From the shitty combat, frustrating mechanics, to the ambiguous reasoning and interacting with the world and why we are even here, it's hard not to call Scorn a bad game. However, despite all this, I did enjoy my time with Scorn, and with it being on Game Pass, it's hard not to actually recommend trying it out. However, going back to the original statement, Scorn should be seen more as a piece of art rather than a game itself. The world is strangely beautiful and lovingly crafted. Its creepy biomechanical art style makes this game a true looker, and while even set pieces are left in ambiguity, so is a lot of actual art. Its sound design is impeccable and gave me the chills, much akin to how people feel about streamers gargling into their microphone and calling it ASMR. You are given a piece and left to your own interpretations of that that piece rather than having the artist explain everything to you in detail. A lot of this game feels like a commentary on the futility of life, our reliance on machines, and how it's left the human race completely behind, hence why the name Scorn is so apt. The definition is thus: the feeling or belief that someone or something is worthless or despicable. From the use of children in the beginning, to self-mutilation, loneliness, and the despair of the flesh monster in its face to the crushing of babies and the inevitable demise of the player character, is forever to exist in symbiosis with the creature who corrupted him. How could one not feel despair in this world? From the art to the sound design to the spectacle of certain aspects of this game, while a bad video game in the sense of the word, this product is a fantastic art piece, one well worth exploring. I truly respect the devs for trying to make something so bold. To have a vision, to stick with it all the way through is truly commendable, and I respect it. A lot of people don't take risks like this anymore, and the fact that this team spent 5 years making this essential art piece is something to applaud, and something I really wish that we would see in more studios nowadays. Now, let's face it, you would never get this out of an EA or a Ubisoft anytime soon. I don't have to like the game of Scorn, but the creation of it as a project I really do enjoy. And just with the rejiggering on the outlook of how to experience this, I think you would too. Just refocus it and don't think of it as a video game, but more as like an interactive art piece, much like how Radiohead put out an experience for one of their albums. But enough of me. What did you guys think of Scorn? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, so sound off down there. And if you like this video, definitely think about giving it a like, as it does help get this video out to more people. Any amount of time that you've given me for this video, I truly do appreciate from the bottom of my heart, and thank you guys so much. For any returning viewers, welcome back, and thank you again for your time. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you can see when we post new videos out. Be sure to check on the other videos on this channel. Until next time, my name is Brendan. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Later.